Welcome, everyone. I wish I could see all of your lovely faces, but I'm just going to imagine that you're all smiling wildly at me. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on Darkajung country and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land and sea, paying my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. You're all dialing in from various locations, so I'd like to extend my respects to the custodians of the land that you're all on today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Maeve. I've been a student advisor here at CareerTrackers in the New South Wales North Region team for almost a year. And I'm also an alumni of the program, interning for a few years before I graduated my degree. I'm a proud Aboriginal woman, descendant of Wiradjuri on my nan's side. I have strong family ties to Kamilaroi, and my pop was an Aboriginal man born and raised in Redfern, but he was quite disconnected from his family and culture, so his mob is unknown. I was actually a little worried about how to introduce myself today. Normally, I would just say my mob and move on, but my dad has recently unearthed a lot of new information about which mob we belong to. And instead of just brushing over it, I just wanted to be real. And I'm lucky to have this platform to speak and thought that I'd use it as an opportunity to hopefully bring comfort to some of you. So I'm still learning and still connecting to my mob and Indigenous culture. I know that some of you struggle at some capacity with your cultural identity. And I wanted you to know that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's okay if you don't have all the answers. And it's okay if you don't know a lot or you know very little about your mob or country. But that just gives you a great opportunity to ask questions and learn more about yourself. And you each have your own ontology, your own belief system that belongs to you and you alone, as well as an intrinsic connection to country. I'm quite lucky to feel a strong sense of pride and empowerment to be an Aboriginal woman, which many in my family haven't been lucky enough to feel. This sense of pride and strength has a lot to do with a childhood immersed in sharing traditional knowledges through connection to country and creativity and storytelling, amazing artwork, and a lot of beautiful music. But there's still a lot that is quite fragmented, and my family and I are still piecing it all back together. It's exciting, and it feels like I'm finding out more and more about myself as I learn more about my mob and culture. The CT community is such an amazing support system. So remember that we're all in this together. And I just wanted to say thanks to all of you for being a part of my CT family. Okay, it's quite unlike me to get so deep and it's actually making me quite uncomfortable. So let's quickly move on. And I'm really looking forward to today's session. And I'm sure you're all pros at using the app by now, but just a reminder to comment and ask questions. So today in our workshop, we are joined by two lovely ladies, Sally Cutts and Alex Barber from Nous Group. Sally is an organisational psychologist and director in Nous's organisational performance and leadership practice. Sally works with government and not-for-profit clients and has expertise in leader assessment and development, organisational design, people strategy, management and development, and culture transformation. Alex is a registered psychologist and consultant in Nous's organisational performance and leadership practice. Alex has experience in organisational design, capability and change, and she has worked with various organisations to enhance their people's capability, culture, well-being and ways of working. Thank you so much for running this session today, and over to you, Sally and Alex.
Thank you, Maeve. Thank you for sharing your story, and it was a really lovely message. And I'd like to highlight that your story was one way of sharing your influence, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, again, thank you. I'm Sally, and with me is Alex down there on the screen. And we're really excited to be presenting to you today. We have quite a strong connection to CareerTrackers. A lot of interns come through Nous, and we really love the vibrance that they bring, the thought leadership that they bring, and just the energy that they bring to their internships. So if you're one of those people out here that have been at Nous, thank you very much for your contribution to us and our organisation. Alex and I are coming to you from Brisbane. We're both on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people, and how fantastic that we can dial in today. Obviously, we'd love to be there in person with you, but really great that we can connect together over this technology, and thank you to everyone who's behind the scenes to make this work. So we've got an hour together today, and we'll do a presentation and then have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. So as we go through, I think as you've been doing for your previous presentations, please feel free to use the app to pop in some questions, and Maeve will be monitoring it. And I think at the end of the session, we'll do a bit of a Q&A. So get those questions happening. We're going to be talking about influencing today, and we might go with the first slide, please. Great, thank you. So when we think of influencing, I'm very aware that the term can come across as something for senior people, something for those leaders that they do in their high-powered roles, they're wheeling and dealing, they're influencing. I'd like to bust that myth and share with you today that influencing is for everyone. Every single person influences others because it's around your impact. So what impact are you having on the people around you? And that is influence. When we think about influencing and where you are in your career, really acknowledge that influencing can look different, determined by your role, your organization, and where you are in your career. So as an early career person on the line today, compared with people who are very, very senior, which you will be one day, the ways in which that you can exert your influence will look different. So today we decided to pull out some really practical ways that you can influence others. And I'm really aware that when you just read them and what we'll do, you think, actually, that doesn't sound like influence. But I'd love you to come away from this thinking, actually, this is a practical way that I can share my engagement and share my presence with others and my influence with others. So what we're doing today, by the end of the session, we'd love for you to understand the value of providing your perspective, understand how to ask curious questions and what does that actually mean, and as a method of demonstrating your presence. And then finally, we'll go into understanding how to write considered emails as influence as well. So to get us just in the brain set for the conversation today, Alex is going to run through a series of questions with us. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Sally. So we have, like Sally mentioned, a few questions here to get you to start personally reflecting about your thoughts and feelings about influencing in the workplace in different ways. So I want you to take a moment now to look at the photos on the screen, and hopefully you can see those clearly, and think about how confident do you feel voicing your opinions in the workplace, and what photo on the screen here best aligns with how you feel in response to that question. While you think about that, I know that for me, when I first started working as a graduate, which was a few years ago now, I I found that I was feeling I felt more worried about not having something to contribute. So for me, if I did have an idea to share, I was really keen to share it, and I was confident to share it. So I might more align with the number 2 photo there of the people playing soccer, pretty eager to make a move and show people what they can do. But for some people, you might find the idea a bit stressful. So maybe you're more aligning with number 4, or maybe the idea of sharing your opinion in the workplace is just exhausting, and you might feel like that koala in number 7. So I'll give you a moment just to reflect on that, and maybe you want to write down what photo you align with. Okay, we'll move on to the second question. So the second question is similar but different. How confident do you feel to ask questions in meetings? So I know that for me, it was a bit different to sharing opinions. I felt confident to share opinions because I was excited if I had something to share, but asking questions stressed me out a little bit more early in my career because I was worried about whether the question I asked would be silly and how people might perceive that. And so I think I would probably align a bit more with number 4 in response to this question. But some may feel different. Maybe you feel like number 3, the chess game. It's you're calculating in your head the cost benefit of asking this question, not asking this question. And some may feel like number one, where they feel calmly confident in asking questions in meetings. Okay, we'll move on to the third and final question. So the third question is, how confident do you feel asking colleagues to meet for coffee over email? I know that for people early in their career, this can be a bit daunting, particularly if you're asking someone who's quite senior in the organization to meet for coffee. That can be a bit nerve-wracking. I know that for me, I felt fairly comfortable to do that in the workplace I was in at NOUS. It was really encouraged, and so I felt fairly calm, maybe number one, in reaching out to people and asking if they would meet for coffee and chat to me about their experiences in their career. So I'll just give you another moment to think about what photo you most align with for that question. All right, so these questions, they can be really useful self-reflection tools, and I would encourage you to kind of reflect on those questions periodically throughout your career. And you might find, like I have, that my responses change over time as you gain more experience and have a diversity of experiences as well in different workplaces. All right, thank you. I'll pass over to Sally to talk about the next section.
Thank you. So we're going to jump into some of the content now, and as we go through, maybe reflect on, are your responses to those questions changing just with some of the information that you're taking on? So we'll look at the value of providing a perspective. So it's helpful for us, if we're going to do something different, to understand why we're going to do that. So a little bit on why would you want to share your perspective. And when we think about sharing perspective, it all comes down to diversity. So diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. Diversity means that teams and organizations are made up of people with varying characteristics and life experiences. So thinking about you as a person, everything that makes you you is unique and adds up to this one person who's like no one else on the planet, which is pretty special. But also means that that combination of different people can lead to these really diverse teams. There's been a lot of research on diversity around the benefits. I think we all know intuitively, yes, diversity is a good thing, but it's really important to know that this is backed up by research as well. So I just wanted to read you a few examples of this. So a survey of 1,700 companies of varying sizes and country locations found that organizations with more diverse management teams have a 19% higher revenues due to innovation compared with other organizations. There's a research study that found when diverse teams make business decisions, they outperform individual decision makers up to 87% of the time. So that's a pretty powerful statistic to think of. You yourself as a decision maker, you might like to think that you're pretty good at making decisions, but the power of coming together with other people with other opinions and perspectives, it just creates a much more impactful decision. And then finally, a study that found that organizations in the top 25% for ethnic and cultural diversity resulted in a 33% increase in performance. So when we talk about diversity, it's not a nice to have. I think it's a must have for many reasons around inclusion, but then also a must have for businesses in terms of performance outcomes. So the next time that you're thinking about speaking up, think of these statistics and think, hey, by speaking up, I'm adding diversity to this, this problem and this perspective. So all of that combining, if you're in a team situation, teams bring a range of perspectives and life experiences. Thinking about what this means of they're poised to recognize new and different opportunities, think of different ideas, means that they're not always thinking the same, so can adapt really quickly and also think in an innovative way. So the only way to actually harness this diversity if the team members are willing to share your unique perspectives, and this includes you. So reiterating again that you bring your own perspective on things based on your unique life experiences. And you've also just been fresh out of uni, or you're still in uni. So you're learning things that are at the cutting edge of your field. When you're at these internships, people who've been out there for a while, they might have older knowledge or more out-of-date knowledge. So think of all of the value of, one, your perspectives, but of your learnings from university that you can share. There's a story that comes to mind of, I think it was in a motor company, and they had been struggling with a problem for, I think, a good 2 to 3 years, and it was causing a lot of technical difficulties, and a graduate actually solved it really quickly just with innovative thinking, and because they didn't have the organizational history there, and they came in with that fresh perspective. So I really want you to value your perspectives, and please never use the term I'm just an intern, I'm just a graduate. Be proud of what that means in bringing a fresh perspective to things. So that's my, I think that was pretty strong, getting you to actually share your perspective. I think Alex will take us through some of the hows, how to do that.
Thanks, Sally. So yeah, 2 other points on why it's really valuable to share your perspective. So Sally's already alluded to how important it is to do so, even when you are an intern or early in your career. So we really empower you to speak up in meetings and to share those ideas with your colleagues. Don't be afraid. If you do have something to contribute, your colleagues will want to hear it. And don't assume, what's important here is that you don't assume that others have already considered the idea that you are thinking you want to share, because that's not always the case. I think there's a tendency, particularly when you're early in your career, to assume that anything that you've thought of, others have thought of. But like Sally said, you have your own unique perspective based on your life and work experiences to date. And even you bring a fresh perspective having still been in uni or recently graduated. So through sharing your perspective, you're not only going to help the team, but you demonstrate to the team that you're engaged with what you're working on, and you demonstrate your presence, which is a key influencing skill. The other reason why it's really important to share your perspective is around, sometimes you might feel like that you don't have something to share, and that's totally fine. It happens to all of us. It happens to me all the time. It's totally fine if you're sitting in a meeting and the topic of discussion, you tend to agree with what everyone's saying. You don't have anything different to add. That's fine. That does happen. But there are other ways that you can demonstrate your engagement and your presence. So this can be through your nonverbal body language, so things like nodding in meetings. It could also be you taking notes during the meeting and then sharing those notes with your colleagues after. And it can be also through asking questions. And we're going to talk a bit more about asking questions in a moment. But before we do that, we're going to pause for a bit and get you to do a bit more self-reflection. So as we've already talked about, asking questions and voicing your opinions in the workplace can be nerve-wracking. So I'm going to get you to do a bit of a thought experiment here. And firstly, I want you to think about, what is the worst thing that you think could happen if you did speak up and share your perspective in the workplace? So we're intentionally catastrophizing here to then hopefully challenge those fears that we may have. So I'll ask you to maybe note down, if you can, on your device or on a piece of paper in front of you, what is the worst thing that you think could happen? So some of these things might be, maybe you think your colleagues might think you're silly if you ask a silly question, for example. Maybe you're worried you'll get it wrong. Maybe you're worried you'll be kicked out of your internship. That's like, worst case scenario here. We are catastrophizing. Maybe you're worried that you have a controversial opinion and what others may think. Maybe you're worried people will disagree with you. These are just some of the things that are common fears that people have around sharing their perspective in the workplace. So I'll encourage you to think about what your fears may be. I'll give you a moment to reflect and write down. Okay, so the second question is the complete opposite. And this is hopefully going to allow you to challenge those fears that you may have. I want you to think about what is the best thing that could happen if you shared your perspective in the workplace. So this could lead to a better outcome for your teams or a more innovative outcome, like Sally was talking about, how diverse perspectives lead to innovation. It could help your team to think of something that they haven't thought of already. You're also obviously demonstrating your engagement and your presence, which are key to influencing. And it might lead to your colleagues asking for your opinions again in the future because they can see that you're engaged, they can see that you have perspectives to offer, and so they'll ask of you again. So I'll give you a moment to reflect on that question. What's the best thing that could happen? Okay, so hopefully you've all taken a moment to jot that down. I guess I just, in summary, like to reiterate that all those fears that we mentioned and that you may experience yourself are totally normal, and everyone experiences those at certain points. But the likelihood of those occurring are much less likely than those best case scenarios that you named. So it's important to keep that in mind, and we would really empower you to share your perspectives in the workplace because it will. Okay, we'll move on to the next section now, which is about asking curious questions. So I did mention earlier that sometimes in meetings or in certain workplace situations, you may feel like you don't have an idea to add or a perspective to add, but asking curious questions is another way to demonstrate your presence and your engagement with the work to your colleagues and therefore your influencing skills. So we'll move to the next slide to talk a bit more about these curious questions. So what are curious questions? Well, they're typically open-ended questions. They're usually framed as a team challenge, so something for a team to solve and work through together. And they're often thought-provoking. So I've listed a few examples of some curious questions on the slides. I'll read through them. One may be, have we considered how this will play out in X scenario or a certain scenario? And so notice the use of the word we here. So you're really framing it as a team challenge, something that we can work through together. How do we think this stakeholder, customer, staff member will respond to X, whatever it is you may be working on? Should we consult these groups of people about our plan or initiative to get their perspectives? Do we think there are any risks involved with our plan that we should be mindful of? And another example is there any context or background that I should know before jumping into this? So that's just a few examples. There's endless examples of curious questions you may ask, and they are context dependent. I think that last one is a really good go-to question, particularly when you are an intern or earlier in your career. That one around, is there any context or background I should know when you're about to jump into a task? The reason why I think that one is useful is because obviously having that context and background information will help you with the task, but also the person you're working with who's more senior than you has all that background and information in their head, and it may not be front of mind for them to share that with you, and they may forget that you haven't got that context. And so that's a good go-to question, curious question to have up your sleeve when you are on your internships. Okay, so why should we ask curious questions? There's a few reasons why these can be really useful for you and your team. So it could prompt your team to consider something they haven't already thought about. And again, don't assume that they've already considered the question that you're going to ask. It could help push the thinking. So this is in that innovation space. It could push your team further to think about things they haven't considered and develop a more robust, innovative outcome. And I've already alluded to the third one there, it could lead to an innovative idea. So really practical outcomes from you sharing and asking those curious questions of your colleagues in the workplace. And even if you do raise something that your colleagues have already considered, that's totally fine. And that's a good thing because it will demonstrate to your colleagues that you are engaged with the work and you understand the relevant concepts that are involved with the tasks at hand. Okay, so that's curious questions. Before we move to emails, I'd just like to take a few minutes to think of how you can apply some of the things we've spoken through so far. So I'd like you to pause and reflect again and pick one thing that you'd like to try doing. In what situation will you put this into practice? So think about some of the things we've talked about already. So asking curious questions, voicing your opinion. Pause and reflect and write down how can you put this into practice in your internships, and in what scenarios could you put these into practice? So I think one of the key areas in which you can put some of these tips into practice are in those meetings, whether you're in team meetings or project meetings. They're really core opportunities for you to share ideas and ask questions. But even outside of meetings, approaching your colleagues in the workplace when you're working on a task to ask them those curious questions, to raise those ideas when you think of them is also a good scenario. Obviously, taking notes during meetings and sending them via email is another scenario in which you can apply these practically. So I'll give you another moment to kind of jot down your reflections about how and when you can apply these tips in practice. Okay, my next follow-up question for you is thinking about those scenarios that you've jotted down where you're going to try and apply these tips that you've heard about today. How will you tell how it went? How will you tell if it went well? Think about the ways in which you can, for lack of better words, assess that situation or reflect on and understand how it went, raising your perspective or asking curious questions. So what this may look like is you could take a moment to self-reflect after you've done that, to think about how did that go, and reflect with yourself about that. Another avenue is after the fact, you could ask for feedback from the people that were in the room or who you were engaging with, to ask how they thought that went, whether it was a meeting or whether it was a one-on-one interaction. You could ask for feedback later on from those people to see their perspectives. You could even track your progress over time. And that's a kind of a mix of self-reflection, but continuing to check in over time to see how your confidence hopefully builds over time with more practice of speaking up and asking questions, as well as checking in on feedback over time and monitoring the kind of feedback you're receiving from other people. So I'll give you another moment to pause and reflect on ways that you think you can track your progress with this and assess how well it's gone when you speak up in the workplace. Okay, all right. We might move on to the next section now, which Sally's going to lead on writing considered emails.
Thanks, Alex. And before we do, I've just noticed a question that's come up in the chat, so we might go to that now. So the question is, What can I do to feel confident giving my perspective when my team or organization does not encourage different points of views? I think this is an excellent question. And first of all, that's a shame that they're not really encouraging of different perspectives. I think just to acknowledge that. I was thinking about a few different things you could try. And one of them, we've been speaking a lot about a team environment. So, how could you break that team environment down? And is there someone within that team that you could actually speak with to test your ideas and get a sense of the reception that you might get from the team if you were then to put it forward? Or how can you work with that person to get them on board and excited about your idea and use them as an existing team member as that channel into suggesting it to the team? And I acknowledge that that might feel like someone's using your idea, but you could speak about how actually it's your idea and you've asked this person to put it forward for you. Other things I thought of is seeing if you can sit down with a team member or in a team scenario and ask the history of a certain decision, ask why something has been done a certain way. So, to us coming in, yes, we bring fresh perspectives, but we do also have that lack of organizational knowledge and context. So, there might actually be an excellent reason for why they say no to your idea, they just haven't communicated it. So I think try to get to the bottom of what's driving it, what's driving these decisions, and this lack of taking on different ways of doing things. I know from my perspective, sometimes an intern will have this beautiful idea, and I'll say, I'd love to do that idea, but because of all of these different contextual reasons, unfortunately, we have to go with that. So it's me still acknowledging and maybe the other person acknowledging that, yeah, that was a pretty great idea, but for all of these contextual reasons, it's not going to happen. So if someone's not forthcoming with that, see how you can ask the question to understand. And then another thing I thought of, if you're struggling to to actually put your question forward, sorry, is thinking about how you can demonstrate the value of your suggestion. So by having this suggestion, what will it actually mean for the team and for you? Is there a way to quantify that? Is there a way to actually show the impact? So when you're putting it forward, you've done a little bit more thinking around what it'll actually mean and what are some of the impacts are. Might just pause to see if Alex, did you have any other thoughts on this question?
I think I'd just add to your point, Sally, around if there is a decision that you don't agree with or understand, and your suggestion, I think, is a good one around asking for that understanding of what led to this decision and why was it made. I think that that's a good point. I think it can be nerve-wracking to do that, and I would recommend the way you frame that question and the kind of the tone you take in asking that question is from a place of curiosity. So like asking those curious questions as opposed to a place of criticism. So it can be the way in which you word the question, something like, I know this decision was made about XYZ. I'm just really curious, to understand how this decision was made or what was the reasoning behind it, and communicating that it's coming from a place of genuine curiosity and not of criticism, I think, is key.
That's a very important consideration, Alex. Thank you for highlighting that. Okay, so we'll move to writing considered emails and then we'll get a little bit more into some of the questions. So when we think about influencing, we've spoken about influencing through verbal communication and body language, how we turn up, how we show that we're engaged. One way to show that we're engaged is through our emails and through written communication. So we'll go to the next slide. The first thing that we're going to talk about is networking. So when you're an intern or a graduate, you're in this position of entering this new organization and you might know one or two people, but everyone else, there's just a sea of faces. So it can be really helpful to have these networking introductions and interactions where you're getting to know different people within the organization. It can mean that You have a better understanding of some of the career paths in the organization. As someone in your early career, you might actually find about roles that you thought never existed and want to ask a little bit more to understand what that actually means. So thinking about what it means for your career. And then also, if you think about influencing, it's a way of extending your influence. The more people that you're connected with, the more people that are available for you to actually have an impact on and with. So when we think about networking, the term networking to me sounds horrible. Do not like networking. But if you think of it as an opportunity to meet people and like-minded people, if they're working in the same organization, chances are they're probably a safe person to connect with. When you're asking for a meeting, it's really important to have a few things in your email. So first of all, who are you? Why are you emailing this person? So introduce yourself. What is your name? What is your role? What is some of your history? You might like to say, I'm here as part of my CareerTrackers internship. Explain the purpose of your email. So why are you writing? Getting this person's attention from the outset. So you'd like to meet with this person. Then that's lovely again, but I've had emails before. Hi Sally, I'd like to set up a meeting. Like, okay, what do you want me to do about that? Yes, we can set up a meeting, but how can I prepare? How can I get the best out of this for you? So the next bit, which is really crucial, explain why you'd like to meet. So do you want to learn about this person's experience or their career journey? Do you want to seek their advice about something or mentoring? Do you want to be able to understand what opportunities they have available for you to develop, or they might have some work that you're interested in doing that you want to be involved with? So, why would you like to form this connection? And for the person that you're wanting to connect with, this just can be really helpful so that they can prepare, they can think about it beforehand, and have your best interests at hand when you actually do meet. And so they're ready for that. So that's the email to do that. I think when you put forward a strong email explaining who you are, what you're wanting, and why you're wanting, it can be really helpful for people just to select, yes, let's have a meeting, let's do it. And I understand that coming from someone who's just started at an organization, it can be pretty scary to send these types of emails. But again, if you do the whole best thing, worst thing to happen, the worst thing that happens is that they don't reply. And that's a shame. And you'd love them to reply. But in the scheme of things, that's a pretty safe worst thing to happen. The best thing that can happen is that you open up these new connections, new opportunities, new relationships with people, and they could be someone that you keep in touch with for as a mentor or as a peer for the rest of your career. An example of this, so I recently was a mentor for a CareerTrackers intern, and he was fantastic, just as an aside. But we had conversations around him wanting to pick the brains of our managing director, so the top person in our organization, and supported him to write an email similar to this. And we worked through the best thing and worst thing to happen. And in the end, he was able to have this incredible interaction and intern with the managing director of a company of 500 people, all because he had sent an email. And actually, the managing director commented that he was impressed with the proactivity that was shown by this intern. So not saying that you all have to get out there and send emails to the CEO, but think about the next time you might be hesitant, think about the benefits that it will have for you. So the last little bit of content that we'll go through is on the next slide. Yep, so this slide. And it's looking at tips for emails following meetings. So I think Alex mentioned before, if you're in a position where you're not quite sure how you can exert your influence, show that you're kind of keen and have ideas on the topic, is to actually use written communication to demonstrate your engagement. One way to do this is emails following the meeting, and you could do this after any type of meeting. There's a few tips that we have there of if you were asked to take notes, or maybe if you weren't and you just decided to take notes, attach notes to the email and make sure that they're tidy so that people can read them really quickly. We want you to develop a succinct headline, which it should summarize the key takeaways and messages from the meeting so that if someone is reading it really quickly, in a few seconds, they can get out the key messages and think, this is what I want to read. Then from there, it can be really helpful to summarize the key points. So often we have the rule of 3 to 5 key points that summarize the most important points from the meeting, and then similarly outline any actions that come out of the meeting and who they're assigned to. So what has happened in the meeting and what needs to happen in the future. And I think that having these really clear and well-written emails can demonstrate your engagement, demonstrate that you're a proactive member of the team and that you can get your point across, i.e. influencing, in a really clear manner. So going to the next slide, we're going to show you, we've put together an example email. So on this email, you see it has a really clear subject line, so project meeting notes from the 17th of Jan 2022. And I'll just read out the email in case you can't read it on the slide there. So, hi all. Oops, I've seen it's bigger, so I might give you a little a minute just to read it yourselves. Okay, so as you're reading, I'll just point out there, can be really helpful to put in that polite opener to the meeting, or to the email, sorry. So thank you for your time today, and then what you've done. So I've summarized the key points and actions from the meeting below. There's a really clear takeaway message and sub points from the meeting, and there's really clear actions as well, who's assigned and when they need to be done by. So think about how you can implement that in your practice. It doesn't have to be in meetings. Think about how you can use those principles around being really clear, driving home that key message in a clear sentence with some supporting points underneath. And that will lead to you being known for having really clear and concise communication as well. So that ends the content of our session. And now I think we'll spend the rest of the time on questions and answers. So I think I'll hand over to Maeve just to take us through some questions.
Great, thank you so much. It was such an interactive session, and I loved your advice on valuing your perspective. It's quite common, especially as an intern, to feel that you're not qualified enough to really have an opinion in the workplace, but that's just a mindset. And you've touched on some really great points and have given us some really great advice to overcome this and back ourselves. And really, what is the worst that can happen? We do have some questions. So the first question is it appropriate to copy your manager in when you're trying to influence someone via email?
I'm going to give a very consultant answer and say it depends. It probably depends on the situation. So sometimes definitely yes, and that could be when the manager's already aware of the context, the other person might already be aware of the context, and you're using almost your manager as that extra influence point. Another reason it can be appropriate is if your manager has asked you to do something, and so you're showing that you have done it or sharing that with them in an easy way. I think sometimes when it blurs the line to being inappropriate is almost the example I gave at the start of, well, just then of using your manager as that point of influence of sometimes that can be inappropriate, and it's, I think, a matter of reading the context and seeing, will this be taken in the wrong way if I copy in my manager? Will it be actually a successful way to influence? Alex, did you have any other thoughts about that?
No, nothing else I think I would add to that, Sally. I think it's definitely context dependent, the way it's perceived to copy in your manager and emails. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I know what you mean. Sometimes it can feel like a little passive aggressive. Definitely need to choose the right time to do that. Thank you so much. The next one is, what advice would you give interns or alumni if they accidentally send an email reply all or couldn't recall it in time and it's incomplete and terrible?
Well, first of all, definitely happened to me. So it happens. Acknowledge that. I think when mistakes happen, it's just acknowledging that mistakes do happen and it's natural. And so I would, and in this case, I did send a reply all saying, apologies, everyone. You know, my initial thoughts were captured and hadn't quite finished. I'll send through the complete message shortly. So having that holder message of acknowledging that that was a bit of a faux pas, maybe having a bit of a laugh, but by acknowledging it yourself, people realize that you know what's happened. I think sometimes when you leave it unacknowledged, people can think, did that person know it was inappropriate? Or did they know that that wasn't the best thing to do? So definitely acknowledge it, maybe have a bit of a laugh with it and say, I'll send through, what it should have been shortly, that kind of gives you a little bit of time then to work out exactly what you wanted to say. Alex, keen to hear your experiences.
I haven't had that experience myself, but I think probably in most cases people are a lot more understanding about it than you would think. I think it's one of those things where you might personally worry about it if you do it, but I think people who receive the email are probably a lot less worried about it, as it is a common thing that happens in the workplace.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, we're all human. Thank you. One more question we have. Can you share a time when you were nervous about connecting with someone, and how did you handle that?
Did you want to go first, Alex? I've been speaking first.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific time. There definitely have been many, and particularly early in my career. Actually, I did just think of one. When I first started at NAS, and I still have this interest, but I have quite an interest in diversity and inclusion and doing work in that space. And coming into NAS as a graduate, when I did, I really wanted to reach out to our expert in the organisation in diversity and inclusion. I knew that this woman was very experienced and very senior, and so that did intimidate me a bit. But with encouragement from some of my colleagues, they encouraged me to reach out to her, which I didn't even think was an option to begin with. I thought that was, if I happen to come across her virtually or physically, then that'd be great. But no, they let me know that, you can reach out yourself, and then help me to craft an email to set up a meeting. And we set up that meeting and we had a fabulous discussion about my interest and past experience in doing diversity and inclusion. So that was a really positive experience for me.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry, we do have one more question. Can you share a time a curious question has worked for you?
I think what Alex was saying in the presentation about asking questions and feeling a bit nervous, that definitely resonated with me of when I finished my degree and not recognizing that the things I learned in my degree weren't shared by others who hadn't done that degree. I know that's a very simple concept, but you just go through uni and you think, yep, I'm learning these great things, but everyone has that knowledge. And so I would struggle with asking the questions, putting my perspective forward, because I didn't think it was maybe anything special or valuable. And so when I saw this question, it just made me think of actually an entry point for me to share my opinions was through asking curious questions of have we thought of X? What might happen if we included XYZ. And so phrasing my opinion in a way that was more of a curious question and putting it forward in a little bit more of a tentative manner, I think then enabled me to grow my confidence to then just put it forward of, I think we should do XYZ. So that I think that just kind of came to me as maybe if you experience that nervousness, phrase it as that curious question, and then that can really build your confidence.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Sally said. I remember being very nervous early in my career about asking questions, out of fear of of asking a potentially silly question that makes me look bad in front of my colleagues. And I remember specific circumstances where I might be in meetings and people use things like acronyms that I didn't know what they stood for. And those are really simple things where it can cause you to feel nervous and you're worried that people are assuming you know what the acronym stands for. But I guess I would encourage you to just ask the question. And in most cases, you'll find people are more than understanding, particularly if you're new to the organization or to the industry or whatever it may be. If you're early career, people are very understanding that you're still building your knowledge and experience. And so don't be afraid to ask those questions. Your colleagues will probably prefer that you do because you're likely to have a better understanding of what you're doing and deliver better work.
Great, thank you so much. So thanks everyone for all the great questions, and thank you, Sally and Alex. I will now actually hand over to the ever so humble and phenomenal student at CT, Sam, to say a few words.
Thanks, Maeve. I'd like to say thank you to both Alex and Sally for sharing their insights and knowledge with us today. First of all, in this session, I really liked in the beginning when you said we're more than just interns. I think this is a great bit of advice. It's something that I've taken under my wing over the past few years and started to embrace. It's definitely led me to further opportunities throughout my internships. And also the curious questions exercise. I think early on in my CareerTrackers journey, I struggled with a lot of self-assurance and confidence, I guess you could say. So I think an activity like this can be the difference for some interns, and hopefully they can take this away and use it further on in their internships. It's fair to say that Now's Group's definitely benefited from your success, knowledge and wisdom that you've both accumulated over the past few years. So on behalf of myself, the CareerTrackers interns and advisors, we'd like to send you a gift as a token of appreciation for speaking with us today. So we'll see everyone at 3 p.m. for the next session. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's LDI session on problem solving. My name's Maddie Taylor-Lovell, and it's my role and privilege to lead our South team at CareerTrackers, working with students across Canberra, Wollongong and Western Sydney. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were the first problem solvers on this land, having developed complex systems around land management, obtaining food and much more in order to live sustainably in this country for over 60,000 years. I am joining today from Gadigal country, and I'd like to pay my respects to Gadigal elders, both past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge that everyone across this session is joining from Aboriginal land and Torres Strait Islander land, and extend that respect to the owners, traditional owners of the country that each of you are dialing in from today. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this afternoon's session, someone who creates solutions to problems for a living. Chris Lambert studied computer systems engineering at Monash University and has 15 years of work experience in a variety of IT jobs. From being a software developer, business analyst, project manager, and now as solutions engineer at Salesforce, Chris has had many years of experience problem solving in his day-to-day work life, and he's keen to share what he's learned to help you succeed in your own careers. We'll have time for questions for Chris at the end of this session, so please pop your questions in the app. Thanks for being here with us, Chris. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Maddie, and thank you for having me. Very excited today to present to you Curiosity, the Art of Problem Solving. We'll get started today by looking at the agenda of what the next 1 hour looks like. If we go to the next slide there, we'll start off with a bit of an introduction. Who am I? What am I doing here? What you're going to get out of today. Then we'll get stuck into a little bit of an introduction to problem solving itself and why it's so important. You know, why it's so important for your career prospects, how you can get good at it through lots of practice and creative thinking and lots of other areas like that. And really we'll kind of elevate all this with a real life practical example. So it's all good to think about the theory, but it's really important when we put it into practice. It helps us to really understand how all of this works day to day, and hopefully we'll get your creative juices flowing for any future problems that come your way in your career. We'll then have some Q&A. Now you might notice there's a JB Hi-Fi voucher there in the bottom right. There is going to be an award for the participant who asks the most, we'll say best question. I was going to say most brilliant question. It doesn't have to be brilliant. We'll say whichever participant asks the best question will win a $50 JB Hi-Fi voucher, which will be sent to you. So questions are more than welcome to ask in the chat there. If they come in through, I'm happy to pause and answer if they're of relevance to the section, but we'll have about 15 minutes at the end to go through your questions as we go. So let's get started. We'll go to the next slide, please. And we'll begin with a bit of an introduction as to who am I. And what we're seeing on the screen here is, in a nutshell, my sort of career path to date and some of the companies that I get to work with today or over the last few years on the right-hand side. So you can see there, from year 12 I finished, I did a 4-year computer systems engineering course at Monash. The year that I did it, they decided to make it 1, but it's actually, it's basically electrical engineering and computer science. Now, at the end of that degree, the first job that I found was actually on the computer science part of the degree, meaning programming. So I got a job as a software engineer at a very small software company, and I got thrown into the deep end there. And after working there for a few years, developing software that businesses would use to manage records of information, I then stayed at the company, but found a different role in technical support. So for those curious, that basically means that in that role, if a customer is using your software and they have a problem with it, or they're having trouble using it, or there's an error, they would send an email or pick up the phone and call, and I would help them solve any problem that they may be having. After that, I was, again, same company, but a business analyst. Now, what a business analyst does, I don't know, no time to go through like all the different things that a business analyst would do, but in my role, what that meant was I would work with the customers, which were businesses, organizations, government departments, and I would work with them to understand their challenges that they were facing today with their current software solutions. And I would document all of those challenges and map them out so that we could solve them. That then led into a role of project management, which I did for a few years at a couple of different companies, where it sort of says what it does in the box, managing projects. Now, that's a different type of problem solving. Managing projects isn't so much solving problems at a technical level, it's solving them in a more organization and people kind of way. It's often called a herding cat sometimes because there are so many people and moving things going on. After doing that, I went back to a more technical role and kind of led to what I do today. So I work for Salesforce. Salesforce is a company that develops business applications that businesses all over the world use. My particular bit of area that I work in is in marketing. So Salesforce makes software that businesses use to manage their sales, their customer service, their marketing, their e-commerce, and lots more. My particular area of focus is in the marketing side. So that means that I get to speak to all different kinds of businesses. Just a very small snapshot of them is listed there on the right-hand side. And what I do is I speak to the marketing and IT departments about what marketing automation platforms they're using today, challenges that they're facing with those, and what it is that they're trying to achieve. Let's pick one as an example. Recently, I was speaking to, not the Hawks, I put the Hawks there, that's the AFL football team, but I was speaking to a different AFL team recently about what it is that they're trying to do. And they say, well, we've got this software that's going to enable us to communicate with our members. Our problem, though, is that we want to increase the number of members that we have. They, as an AFL team, they have some ideas about how to do that. But where their expertise was lacking is around how they can use the software to help support how they're going to grow their members. And so my role there is really to help solve that problem by actually mapping what it is they're trying to do, the nitty-gritty, to the specific parts of the software so that they can actually achieve their goal of increasing their members for the 2022 season. That's in a kind of nutshell. I welcome any questions about the different types of jobs that I've had. If you have them, please write them. But for now, what we'll do is we'll get started on the main theme for today. So we go to the next slide, please. We'll start talking about problem solving. And you've got there, why is it so important? And there's a very obvious answer there. And that is that it is one of the #1 skills that employers value. And problem solving is not a hard skill. It's not a technical skill that you go, and do a year-long course or something and you learn. It's considered a soft skill. And that means, anyone can learn it. That's what I think it means, which is really great. And the reason why it's so important, well, the #1 reason you see there is that, I think, is that it shows a can-do attitude. Okay, what does that mean? The best way I'm going to explain this to you is if you consider the opposite. Let's imagine that you have an employer and they have an employee and they say to this employee, I'm having difficulty with something. It might be maybe, I've got an example here that I've just jotted down. Maybe they've said, well, I'm wondering if you can help me write something up in Microsoft Word. I just don't know how to do this particular thing. Can you help me? And that employee doesn't actually know how to do it. It's a problem that they need to solve. If that employee turns around to their boss or their manager and says, "Oh, I don't know how to do that," the employer says, "Well, okay, all right." Now compare that to another employee who says, "You know what? I don't know how to do that, but I'm eager to learn, so I'm going to go and find out how to do it." An hour later, they come back to their manager. They say, "I've figured out how to do it. Here's how you do it." They show that person how to do that thing in Microsoft Word. The manager's happy. The employee's happy because they've helped them. That employee looks good in the manager's eyes, and they've built their brand, let's say, in the company, and they are more important, or they're more valued, in the organization. So that's really what I think a can-do attitude means. But there's more to it. There's more reasons. If we click next, another really important reason why problem solving is just so critical is teamwork. If you take that example of the employee who doesn't have a can-do attitude, can you imagine what it might be like to work with someone like that if in a team? Often in the workplace, you will be working maybe on a project or an opportunity or something where you're not working by yourself, you're working with others. And when you come across a problem, it's so important that you're able to work well with others. And part of that is yes, having that can-do attitude, but being consultative, thinking creatively, involving others. General good teamwork comes from everyone respecting each other and working together, in a really productive kind of way. You can't do that if you don't have those kind of basic abilities to look at a problem, think about it creatively, come up with solutions, try them, and so forth. So it's really important because employees value it because they think, this person can work in a team. And that's something that employers really value. Let's go to the next point, which is growth, or continuous improvement is something that I've put there. So what does that mean? Growth as a person, growth as an employee in a company is important. It shows ambition. It shows that you care, right, about not only about the company, but that you care about your own career progression and your own growth as a person, as well as your skill set, and that kind of thing actually it's a very important ingredient, I think, of success. So when we say continuous improvement, what I really mean is that when you're solving problems, what you're actually doing, one of the key things you're doing is learning. If there is a problem and you already have the knowledge to solve it, fine. But so much of problem solving as a general skill is going out and finding that, meaning that whatever the problem is that you're faced with, you may not actually know the answer. You may not even know how to find the answer. But that brings us back to the title of today's presentation, which is curiosity. By being curious, you are able to naturally go out and find those answers. That art of doing that is actually continually improving your knowledge, your skills, and that in turn leads to growth, not only on a personal level, but also on a professional level. Again, one of the key areas there to ensure that you are successful in your career. Let's click the next button. There's one last bit to look at here, I think, or a couple. So just some examples, thinking about some of these general ideas. One of them that we've got is the transitioning to working from home or learning from home. And that's an example of something that would have been pretty scary to a lot of people in the beginning. With everything that was happening at the start of 2020, that kind of transition can be a bit scary. You're in a new environment. You're having to work from home rather than having to go in. You have all these new tools to use. You haven't used Zoom before, and it can be quite daunting, especially in a large group of people on a virtual call. And so it can be a bit scary to be able to use that and speak up. But it's okay to be overwhelmed like that. And I think an important thing to remember is that anything becomes easier the more you do it. So once you've done something a few times, you become more comfortable, and it's no longer scary. So looking at that as a problem, the transition, to working from home, or learning from home, I should say, initially you could view that as a problem, but it's one that was solved by ensuring that you have the right workspace set up at home. You have a desk, you have somewhere where you can work. You get used to the tools and familiar with them. You get practice working on them. You get used to, the ability of not being able to be face-to-face with people. This is a problem that step by step we've been able to overcome. Leading into the actual live example, I suppose, of today that we're going to be sort of working on, I guess, I just want to give another example of just more workplace focus. If we click next, I want you all to pretend that you are the boss of your own company, whatever company you like. If you can't think of one, we'll say that you design and manufacture your very own shoes. And what I want you to do is pretend now that you've hired someone and their job is to do all of your social media posts, okay? And what that means is that you've hired them, they've come straight out of uni, and now they're using a Mac, because you've bought them a brand new MacBook. And you've said to them, I want you to do all of the writing, the copy they call it, writing copy, or all the words that are going to be used in our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter posts. And every day I want you doing posts showing off our shoes, so you're going to need images and so forth. And that is this person's job. On day one, this person who's never used a Mac before says to you, I want to use emojis. I want to use smiley faces and little emojis of shoes. I don't know how to do that on a Mac. I knew how to do it on Windows. How do I do that on a Mac? This is an example of a problem for this employee. How might they do it? Well, as an employer, what you would really want to see is that employee solve the problem for themselves. How can we solve this problem? How do we write emojis on a Mac? It's easy to do on an iPhone, on a mobile phone. It's easy. In the keyboard, you just press a button and then up come the library of emojis, but there's no such thing on a Mac. So how do we do that? How do we solve that problem? We're going to come up with some really easy and practical sort of examples here. But if we just go to the next slide, just to answer this one here, we're going to start in the how can you develop your skills slide. So look, the answer to that very basic emoji problem, right, is there in the subtitle. Just ask Google. If you're out there in the workplace and someone asks you a question or you need to do something and you don't know how, it sounds silly, but always open a new tab and just search the internet for whatever it is you're trying to do. In that case, you would type in, how do I type emojis on a MacBook? There will be billions of answers, but usually the first is going to give you that answer. And that's a really simple example. And it sounds silly, but honestly, it's not. And the reason why I'm reinforcing this is because I can honestly put my hand up and say, even today, in my job, someone who's been doing this for 16 years, 15 years, I today did exactly that. Someone I work with posted a question in our chat, and it was something about our software. And they said, can our software do blah? And I didn't know the answer. But I know that we have documentation online. I know that our software is used by lots of companies. It's pretty common. I just clicked a new tab and I typed in the question and I found the answer. The name of this slide is how can you develop your skills? And really, the biggest advice here is those two words, which is to be curious. That's the biggest way. What that means is that when posed with a problem that you don't know the answer to, the way that you approach solving that problem is to be curious about it, is to wonder, is to think about the why and the how, and to really, just to try and naturally be curious. A great way as well, an extension of that before it even becomes a problem, is to see something in the workplace and just be curious. I wonder how that works. Why is that number so bad? This art of curiosity, or rather being curious, leads to all kinds of wonderful outcomes in the workplace. Because when you're curious, you not only find answers to problems, but you also come up with new and creative ways of doing things that make things more efficient, things that can be shared with others, things that generally make you look like a better employee because you're providing value to the business. So that curious, just be curious, wonder about things, is such an important, I think, an important way to develop this skill. The second point that we have there is to think about how you can break down any large problem into smaller problems. And with that, that's actually what we're going to spend most of the remainder of today on. We're actually going to look at a live example. But just before we do that, I'm just going to take a moment here just to look at some of the questions that have come through. One of the questions that's come through is, we'll just tackle a couple because we've got time. When faced with multiple different problems, how do you effectively prioritize and balance the expectations of key stakeholders? That's an excellent question. Prioritization is the name of the game. It's right in. The question is, how do you effectively prioritize? I'll answer that part first, and then we'll talk about the expectations of those stakeholders. When you've got a couple of different problems, or maybe more problems that you've been asked to solve, the way that I look to prioritize is looking at which, firstly, addressing urgency. Are any of these problems urgent? Do any of them need to be done by the end of the day? Otherwise, something will burn down, right? Or do you need to put out a fire, as we would call it? That's the first way that I look at that, because that often can very easily dictate, which needs to be worked on first. But often that's not the case. Often you've got some that kind of look like they're equally important, and they, and they both sort of need. But then again, I would look at time. Time is one of the most valuable resources that we have that we can't generate more of. So I would prioritize what needs to be done first, meaning, is there a hard date that something needs to be done by? The second thing that I do to prioritize is by looking at the size of the work that needs to be done to solve the problem. And that is important, because that then leads into the second part of the question, which is managing the expectations of the key stakeholders. For example, if there's one particular problem or project that you don't even know what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like, you don't even know how to even tackle it. With something like that, that's going to require a bit more time. I think it's important up front to set the expectation with the stakeholder that there might be quite a bit of work that may go into this. But it's also, I think, important to regularly communicate as well. If you are balancing multiple stakeholders, just regular updates is always important, be they daily or weekly, depending on the span. That's a great way to balance those stakeholder expectations, just by keeping them in the loop, I think. We'll move on to the second question, which is, as someone who problem solves for a living, how did you tackle the challenge of deciding which path you wanted your career to take and what that looked like? That is an excellent question. The first one was good. That's also really good. And right now, the person who asked that question, if you're willing to mention who your name is to the thing, is currently in the front runner for the JV Hi-Fi voucher. Because so many university students I speak to have this this fear that I need to know what I'm going to do. or I have to know this stuff from now. And the answer is you absolutely don't. Right? So majority of people just don't know. So I would say that the challenge of deciding which path I wanted to take wasn't really a challenge, because to begin with, I was just grateful to have a job out of uni. Great. I've never really had a challenge of trying to pick and choose. And the reason for that is because I've always been curious. When I was first a software engineer and then I became technical support, that was not a problem for me to solve. That wasn't a challenge for me to think. Do you know how that came up? As a software engineer, I was writing the code to develop the software our customers would use. As a result, after a few years, I got to know the product inside and out. So when the phone would ring and the two technical support people were busy, I just started picking up the phone. I was going outside of my defined role because I saw they needed help. And I just picked up the phone. How can I help you? And it was a customer. And they say, I'm getting this error. What does this mean? How do I get around this? And I knew exactly what that error was because I'd coded it in. So I was able to help them. My natural curiosity there of, I wonder who's on the other side of this phone, and opened up that sort of opportunity. So to answer your question, it hasn't really been a challenge because my curiosity has opened up many doors for me. It's opened up a lot of opportunities. And so that's why on this slide, be curious. That's one of the reasons why it's so important, not just for solving skills, because it opens doors and it opens opportunities. And when I've changed companies, I think, which is one of the bigger decision paths, the challenge of what kind of one to take, it's been a natural kind of thing. I look at what am I good at, what do I enjoy doing, and that's where I decide to follow. So great question, thank you. I will continue on with the slides. Ben, if we get another question come in, I'll look out for your post there, Ben. Thank you. We'll keep going to the next one. Now, we've got an example there. You've been asked to develop a new website for a shoe company. And I've got a kind of placeholder empty slide for this because this is what it kind of looks like when you're faced with a problem that you don't really know the answer to, right? Something like this, just an empty canvas. The example that we'll kind of just talk through, and what I'd like you to do if you're at home and you're looking at this presentation in a web browser, open up a new tab and we'll kind of just talk through this. So the challenge here, the problem that we've been given to solve, you're an employee at a company and your manager has said that the website, right, that all the e-commerce happens on, where you sell shoes, is no good. It's terrible. There's lots of customer complaints. You're losing money, right? You're just not making as much revenue as you were because the website is clunky. It's hard to use. And the analytics tells you that a lot of people who come to the site, they just abandon. And they abandon because of how hard it is to use. It's hard to add things to cart. It's hard to view the products. There's not many photos. There's no integration with PayPal or Apple Pay or any of that sort of stuff. It's just difficult, and the website could really do with a revamp. And you've been given the task to lead that. So the reason why I chose this one as an example is because it's a pretty big problem, and it's not one that is just in a silo. It is one that we are going to need to break down. So on a new tab, I'm just going to open up a shoe company's website. I'm going to go to nike.com.au just to give me some ideas as we kind of spitball this. So when we go to Nike, we're going there for inspiration, just to kind of get a bit of a view here. What we're going to start with doing, and you can do this on your own pen and paper or in Notepad or whatever it is you want to use, what I'd like you to do is start to think about what are the different sort of pieces that make up a website. And then what we'll do is we'll think about the different types of roles that are going to be involved. So when we look at a website, these are the general areas that we think of. The first thing that comes up is imagery, right? When you get to a website, the images that are used are so important, because without images, people can't see the shoes and so forth. So the imagery is very important. So that's one sort of area. We need a new website. The actual, what's called user experience, that's another area. The user experience refers not just to the imagery, but the overall interface of the website. So that means the way that it looks, the way that it feels, the way that it navigates, the categories across the top for different shoes. Might have men's shoes, women's shoes, kids' shoes, etc. What does our product pages look like? Right? What's the overall flow? So user experience is another key area. As I click on one of the categories, for example, on the Nike, what we also want to start to think about are things like our subcategories and filters, or what I'm going to call navigation. Navigation on a website is critical. If you don't have the right navigation or filters in place on the left-hand side when you're looking at products, it can ruin how the experience, the customer experience is on the site. So we've got navigation. We have what I'll call art design, which is the creative, the color scheme, what should the buttons look like, what fonts should we use. And lastly, we'll finish off with the cart. The cart process is very important. It can't be clunky. It must be easy to add something to your cart and then easily be able to either keep shopping or go straight to checkout and pay. And when we do pay, we want to make sure that we're presenting options. We want to make it easy for our customers. Buy now, pay later, like Afterpay, very important. So payments is another section of the website. So as we jot all of these down, which I'll be doing here, we have UX, navigation, imagery, we have color scheme or graphics, we have the cart, and we have payments. These are all of the key areas that we're going to need to improve for our new website. Now, here's the thing. As a shoe company, though, your main business is making and selling shoes. You are not in the business of building e-commerce websites from the ground up. So another overarching area here of this new website to sell shoes is going to be, do we build all this ourselves, or do we go and find a company that makes e-commerce websites and buy one instead and just make adjustments? And that's another, that in itself is another problem to be solved. So we've got what seemingly started out as the one very large problem. We've now broken down into about half a dozen sort of mini projects, if you like. We'll keep going. What we now need to do is look at how we, excuse me, how we divvy up these into the right people. So for things like imagery, we need to, I mean, that is a problem. One of the biggest complaints on the current website is that there's just not enough pictures. There's just one picture of a shoe. So we have imagery. What that means is that as a problem, we need to solve this. How do we do better? How do we break that down, just the imagery? So you start to think about, well, what's involved with images of shoes? Well, you need, how do we ensure that every time we manufacture a new type of shoe, that we've got the right person in place, take the photos and upload them? How, when the photos are done, how are we going to upload them to the site? Who's going to be in charge of doing that? Each of those questions that I've just posed, right, represents a little mini sort of problem to be solved, but ultimately what we would call them is tasks. So we would document all of those and start assigning them out. When it comes to user experience, navigation, and graphics, this arguably all contributes to the look, feel, and ultimately customer experience of the site. And so we might bundle those together and allocate them a team of people to look at. We need to decide, what is our new color scheme? How do we decide that new color? That's a problem to be solved, because colors and everything, that's a very subjective thing. So how do we solve for that? You know, some people in the company are going to want red, others are going to want blue. That in turn will be a problem. How do we solve that? A way we can solve that is by having a graphic designer come up with a few different styles. Right? Maybe we might want to put it out to a vote. Right? For all the employees in the company, we'll send it all out and everyone can take a vote, and so it's democratic, and this is the design that we're going to go with. For navigation, how do we decide that? What's the best navigation? Do you have men, women, kids, sale, and that's it? Or do you have a top menu that you can hover your mouse over men and then choose different categories? Should you be able to filter by size? What should you be able to filter by? How do you solve this problem? How do you know what the best navigation is? The answer, by the way, is by doing research. You research that problem. You Google, what are the best e-commerce websites? Which sites have the best experience? Or just go and visit others. Visit Nike, visit Adidas, visit Puma, and see which ones have really great, easy to use ones. That's really part of research. Lastly, we have cart and payments. Now, in order to do this, that's going to be quite a technical element, especially the payments. So we want to make sure we have the right resources there, the right technical resources to do that. But if we want to have Afterpay as one of the payment choices, how do we get that in? Do we need to go to the Afterpay website and sign up? We need to register as a business there. We need to get that set up. So every one of these little areas we are breaking down into smaller and smaller problems. And in doing that, what we're seeing here are some really key themes that are coming through. These themes are research. In so many of these areas, as you break down the problems into little ones, they become bite-sized problems that can be solved in some cases by simply doing research. And research is such a critical skill that comes under problem solving. Research enables you to understand what the problem is to begin with. Right? Maybe it was a terrible navigation that made people hate the website, for example, but then go and find new and creative ways to do better. What else? The things that we're seeing here, being able to analyze things, I think, as well, is really really important, and decision making. I mean, with something as subjective as what color scheme should the website make, you need to be able to think about what's the best way to make a decision. So many times when we're trying to solve problems, you need to just make that decision, and we'll call it executive decision. Other times it's a far more democratic type of approach. Okay. As we consider now our problem of the website, we've touched on all the sort of different areas and how we're going to break it down. But the last problem that we've got, mini problem that was sort of broken down here, is, do we build this brand new website from scratch, or do we go out to a company like maybe a Shopify or a HubSpot, like an existing vendor who already has many retail websites already done, and it's just a template and it's really easy to use? Should we just go out there and just buy one of their off-the-shelf tools? How do we know whether it's better to buy something that's off the shelf, meaning we're going to go to a software vendor and pay them money to use their product, versus building it yourself? How do you solve that problem? This is what's called a classic build versus buy problem. And lots of companies have this. I speak to companies every day that have this very same challenge. It's a very real problem to be solved. The most common way to address this is to look at it from the financial side. That's often one of the key drivers, not the only thing. which is cheaper? So you might speak to a software company and say, we'd like to buy an e-commerce website from you. How much will that cost? That in and of itself, I could speak to it for another hour, but I won't. And they might come back and they say, this costs $100,000 per year. Okay. On the other hand, we could build it ourselves. We don't have to pay for it. But actually, no, you are somewhat paying for it because you need to hire developers or use your existing team to do it. So it becomes more about time. It becomes about employee salary. And so then you have to say, well, how much is that going to cost? How long do you think it will take to build this website from scratch using our own people? And if they come back and say it'll take 3 people 6 months to build, well, then you've got to do the maths and work out, is that better? What about ongoing? To buy it is going to cost $100,000 every year. But a website is not static. It evolves over time. So you need to find out from your own in-house staff, what's it going to cost to maintain this site and add enhancements and so forth. Again, this is quite a big problem to be solved. And that's one of the most core things to look at, sort of the financial side, the time side, whether you want to be looking at that, or whether or not it's just a matter of, well, let's just buy off the shelf because at least they'll give us free enhancements every year. All different aspects of this problem. So just to recap this whole we need a new website, what we've done is we've taken this overarching problem and broken it down into its core components of what the website is made of. Within each of those, we've thought about what each little component, be that the user experience or the cart, the vendor, what are all the different little things that need to be considered along the way? And how do we go about solving each of those? And what we've seen in some cases, it's a matter of assigning it to the right person. In others, it's about research. In others, it's about a team working together as a team to come up with a creative solution. I'll just take a moment just to pause there and just check some of the questions, because we've had quite a few that have come in. Okay. I have a question, and as the questions come in, if I can, I'll relate them back to this website example. It's 3:42. We've got 18 minutes left, but there are quite a few questions, and it might take a while to answer. So we'll start answering them. Okay, the first question coming up, number 2. Can you describe a time when you had difficulty finding a solution to a problem that you had? What did you do, and how did you go about it? Okay. I will pick, the problem that I'll pick is a software engineering problem, meaning that on my computer, on the tools I was using, I was getting an error message. I was trying to compile some software on my computer and there was an error and I did not know what the error meant. So the first thing I did was Google the error. That led me to a website called Stack Overflow. For any of the engineers on the call, Stack Overflow will become your best friend. But in Stack Overflow, there was no answer. Only one person had asked that question and there was nobody that had an answer. I continued Googling, trying to look at other sites, but this error I was getting was so obscure, just couldn't work it out. So the way that I addressed it was to look to my colleague, firstly, just to see if he had heard of this, and he hadn't. But what we then did is we tried to replicate that problem on his computer. So I set up the same project, got him to run it, and lo and behold, he did not get that error. So then all of a sudden, a problem that seemed insurmountable, no idea, all of a sudden became a lot more tangible to solve. What was so different about his computer that he's not getting the error? And that was exactly the clue that we needed. We were able to then work through and trial and error to work out what was different and what was the same until we worked out what that key difference was that was generating that error. And that's how we were able to solve that problem.
Thanks for that, Chris. That's a really valuable insight from that situation. We've got another question here. Lots of questions coming through in the chat. I think there's a few people who are keen to get their hands on that JB Hi-Fi voucher. So we've got a fantastic question from Alicia Smith, which is, how do you balance taking initiative to solve problems with knowing when it is the right time to ask for help?
That's a very good question, because sometimes you can be trying to find an answer all day. I would say, depending on the size of the problem, it's important to time box it. For example, if you're trying to solve a problem, you might say, all right, I'm going to spend no more than 30 minutes on this, or 1 hour on this. Right? Or it depends on the size of the problem. The bigger the problem, you might sort of allocate more. But when you are stuck, it's important, to make sure that you've put some time into it, so that when you do ask for help, you can actually say, I've spent 30 minutes trying to find an answer to this and I can't. And it's important to do that, because the person you're asking for help then appreciates the fact that you've got that can-do attitude, that you've tried to go and find an answer yourself, but you haven't spent all day and wasted time on it. So that's what I'd say to that.
Yeah, I love that. And just so that you don't spend hours and hours or days working on a problem that you could get help with. We have another question from Noah. Often I'm in situations where I know the answer to an issue or question. However, I don't feel confident in speaking up. I think this was also a similar question was raised in the previous session on influencing. How do you get better at asserting yourself to answer problems? Great question, Noah.
That is a good question. And I don't know if I'm the best person to answer it, because I've never had that problem myself personally. However, I will say that although I think I have confidence, I'm the kind of person who, when it comes to this situation you're describing, where there's a problem, you know the answer, my confidence comes from knowledge. I will research and test my solution. That's very important. If you found a solution, make sure you test it to make sure that you are 100% confident it is right. And in doing that, in growing that knowledge, my capability, that in turn gives me the confidence so that I can speak up. Right? And when you do, I think it's important as well, if you know it is the right, and like, it's one thing if you're unsure and you want to be gentle about it and maybe suggest the solution. However, if you know 100% that is the right solution to the problem, it's important to make sure that you are speaking confidently, to not be meek. You don't have to be boastful by any means, but it's important to speak confidently in what you've got. And if you're still finding it difficult, back it up with the explanation. To say, I was researching this problem and this is what I found and this is the answer, or I tested this solution on my machine, or I tried this. Because when you are telling someone the answer to a problem, if you back it up with, oh, I've tried it on this and it worked, that can often give that person the confidence, particularly if there is not an age gap, a tenure gap, meaning that you might be the junior person and that person is a senior person. If you are backing up what it is that you're saying, it gives them the confidence as well that what you're saying is right.
Yeah, great. So backing up what you're saying with the research that you've done and the knowledge that you've gained. And I guess that links to your point from earlier around, problem solving, not having all the knowledge, but having that curiosity to go out and find the knowledge, which I really like. We have another great question from Abby. She's asked, has there ever been a situation at your work where you saw an opportunity in a potential problem? What did you do and what was the outcome?
Yes, there was. In my role, I've been doing my particular role in my company for 3 years, and we often have new starters join the team. The potential problem that I saw was that one of the new starters in the team who had recently gone through their training and was out in the field, I saw them working with one of our other team members, let's say, and I noticed that as they were covering, there was a particular problem, a particular solution, I noticed that in their answer, they were a little bit afraid because they had a weakness in one particular area. Meaning that, let's say they were talking about a particular bit of software that's this big, and they were saying all of these things, but when it came to that last one, they were sort of stumbling a little bit. They were shy, they weren't confident, they kind of lost it there a little bit, but it was very subtle, very subtle. So subtle, in fact, that the person they were presenting to didn't actually notice it. And that's why I saw it as a potential problem to be solved. So the way I approached that was not to call that person out and say, you know, you need to work on that, but rather to ask them for their opinion and say, how do you think that went? Is there any areas that you feel that you need to develop? Are there any areas that you feel are really strong? And so by doing that, it let them kind of speak up to sort of express, yeah, this one area I'm not. And that way I was able to work with them on that area that they had a bit of a gap in their knowledge to help sort of bring it up, so that the next time they were in that situation, it didn't explode into a problem where they weren't able to properly present on that area.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And we have a question from Galara, and they've asked, what was the hardest decision you had to make, and what were the results of that decision? Very interesting question. And looking back, would you have done anything differently?
I will say one of the hardest decisions, I think, was leaving my first company to go join a different company. The first company I joined, I loved that job. I did many jobs. I did a software engineer, technical support, business. I did lots of different roles, and I was comfortable. I'd been there for many, many years. I knew the product inside out. I knew the people inside out. I knew our customers inside and out, and I was comfortable. The reason it was one of the hardest decisions, because leaving your comfort zone, that's really what it is. I had to leave the comfort zone because, frankly, there was no more challenge. I'd sort of done everything. It was a small company, and I'd sort of done everything, and I wasn't learning anything new. I also wasn't getting pay rises anymore every year because I wasn't doing anything new. I wasn't extending myself because there was no opportunity to, because I'd been there for so long and I'd done everything. And again, it's a small company. So one of the hardest decisions was to leave that comfy, my comfort zone. And the results of it were great. I went to my next job as a project manager. I was not very good at, in hindsight. It was a big step. I learned an absolute bunch, but it wasn't really my passion. It wasn't really something that, I was that confident in. It wasn't really something that I enjoyed. It was very, very different. However, at the end of that job, it opened up such opportunity through the connections and network that I had made in that role. That means that I would not have done anything differently.
Great, that's a very interesting story. And another question here from Rashay. Can you describe a time when you anticipated potential problems and developed preventative measures?
I can, but I'm trying to think of ones that I can succinctly answer into, like a succinct example that I can describe in less than 2 minutes. Anticipate potential problems and develop preventative measures. Yes. In my role, I work with what's called account executives, who are sales representatives, and they are the first line with our customers and the businesses. And it's really hard for them coming on board because our software is quite complex and it's quite a challenge for them. And I saw a problem in that because we hire so many and there's quite a high turnover, the problem is that as they're coming on board, I was finding that, you've got to spend time with them to teach them things and so on. So almost from like a learning and development perspective, the preventative measure here that I developed was to prevent them becoming 3 months in the role and they still don't know what our solution does, or they still haven't seen it in action, or they're still not really across it, I developed a series of short videos that they could digest in their own time during their first 2 weeks that would enable them to get really bite-sized kind of bits of training on actually what the technical part of our product is, but dumbed down in a really kind of easy to understand way. And that kind of prevented them getting to that 3-month mark and not having and not being able to talk confidently to customers about our solution.
Yeah, great. So again, that thing around breaking something big down into smaller bite-sized pieces seems to be a bit of a theme. I think that's just about all the questions that we have time for. Before we wrap up the session, Chris, we have a clear front runner for question winner, or will that go to the panel to review and come back on later, and we'll get in touch with the question winner?
Do we have there's actually been, look, all the questions have been great, so thank you. They've all been really good, and there's been a couple that have come through that were very close. I would say Noah's question, Galara's question, Abby's question, so many great questions. But I'm going to go with my original person who asked that very first or second question, was it? As someone who problem solves for a living, how did you tackle the challenge of deciding which path you wanted your career to take and what that looked like? That's such a good question, an important one, and it's one that so many university leavers or tertiary education leavers face. And it's such an important one, I think. So I would award it to that. If we know the name of the person who asked that, we can get in touch.
We do, in fact, know the name, and it just happens to be the person who'll be closing off this session. So congrats, Ben Quigley. Thanks for your presentation, Chris, and your workshop. That was some really valuable insights. I'll hand it over now to Ben to close off the session and to say a few words on behalf of the audience.
Firstly, Chris, thank you very much for the gift card. Really appreciate it. Worked hard on those questions. I'd like to start by saying a big thank you. It was very clear through the presentation just how invested you are in problem solving, and that really came through with your enthusiasm for us all today. Personally, as someone who's been working with Salesforce for the past 3 months in my internship, something that really rung true for me was the need for effective problem solving techniques in the workplace, as well as the power curiosity has in fueling those innovations, particularly in the heavily digitized world we're living in. Another key takeaway was the value a good problem solver can contribute both to the workplace and to society as a whole. Our CareerTrackers has sent you through a token of our appreciation in the mail you should be receiving pretty soon. Just to thank you for your time and your presentation today. We really hope you find some value from it. And once again, thank you very much. To wrap up, we would like to thank all of the interns for your time today. And we sincerely hope you are able to extract the value from this presentation and incorporate it into your own lives. See you all tomorrow and have a lovely afternoon.